Alright, okay, so this is the important bit. So this is the harness out of a 2.2 Liberty 1991, thereabouts, give or take a year. And this is the harness plus some little adaptions, which we'll get to in a sec by itself. So this is probably the bit that a few of you might be interested in seeing. Obviously it's a pretty old engine by today's standards, but gee, it's been reliable and it's quite powerful enough to have a bit of fun without going turbo. So just a quick recap. So these are the connectors that join into the engine bay on the left hand side, coming down through past the aircon stuff and near the battery. And that harness literally goes up, goes through the firewall above the glove box about here, and then travels along the back of the dashboard. And I didn't even know this relay was in the circuit until I actually started to feed the wiring loom out, because it was tucked in up behind, or almost behind about the heater area, so you couldn't even see it. So again, following the harness through, this is all still under the dashboard until you get to this junction here, and everything on my right is actually back through the firewall and out into the engine bay on the right hand side, or driver's side in Australia. So I'll just show you these wires one by one so that you can get a bit of a feel for what I'm dealing with, and you might be. First one's just a single wire. That's the one for the starter motor, I believe. So that one's quite straightforward. And these ones actually may not be, sorry. Yeah, no, sorry, that one is. And these are ones that go, you follow the loom, it splits, as you can see, into a few. You've got a little plug here, and you've got these little connectors here. Now, they all come off the back of the engine, literally sort of under the throttle body or throttle intake area. And you follow this along a little bit more, and these were the ones that were over on the driver's side near the strut tower and the firewall. So one's for your airflow meter, and the other's for the little thing that I keep calling the igniter, but doesn't really matter what it is. All we know is we can get it back there, and a couple of little earth screws as well. So really all that side of the engine wiring harness is quite straightforward, because it literally plugs straight into the whole engine. So the little bits that are going to be a little bit trickier is down this end, and once you've actually got it out, it's not too bad. And I can see why people cut them down, even though this one isn't cut down. So I'll just run through some of the wiring here, and we'll keep following this harness along at the moment and just look at all the junctions along the way. So the first junction, obviously it vias into two looms. First one here, which I've accidentally cut through when I was undoing a cable tie. So you've got one single wire. So that particular one goes up to the ignition barrel plug connector, and it's for the start. So when you're actually keying over the car to get it to start, that's what that one's for. Following through, I'll just branch down to this right hand side as I'm looking at it. These two connectors were not plugged into anything, nor was this little black potential earth thing here. So again, that's probably why people strip the harness down, because those are not necessary. So you've got a good, 10, 12 wires there that you just do not need in the harness. But obviously it's easier for me just to put it in as it came out of the car. So following that down, these are the ones that literally do run over to the ECU. So we've literally got 1, 2, 3, 4 yellow plugs there for the ECU, and we've got our little test or diagnosis connectors. You've got the two greens plug socket, and you've got the black plug socket. So once again, there's nothing there that you have to wire in to the L series per se. That's all literally part of the harness that just stays with it and plugs into the ECU. So if I double back to where I was again, come back up to this Y junction, and that's the wire that I ID'd before. Follow that down. You've got another junction here, which branches off into these two, we'll just call them relays for now. I haven't bothered IDing these yet, but they're part of the loom. That's all we need to know. They were tucked up in under the steering column, and follow that back. Next one of the loom, obviously got a nice big solid earth, which I believe was also bolted under the steering column as well. And following that on, basically it just branches into three. You've got another little junction here, and then you've got a single wire here. This single wire I've tracked through, and it is the fuel pump output from the harness. So that is one that you have to track through or run a new wire depending on what type of conversion you're doing. And I suspect, even though I haven't bothered looking, it actually runs via this relay. So again, I suspect that's what it's a black wire with a red stripe. So that's my suspicion there. So that is the first wire out of this group. I should say second, because we've got that little fellow up there that you need to tack into the L series. Following along from that back down to here, and I'm not sure how much of this is actually Liberty and how much is actually what they've done, but effectively it comes into two connectors, as you can see here, both translucent in colour. I'll just flip this over so it's a bit more visible when you get that far. So yeah, two connectors at the end of the day. Get this one out of here so you can get a bit more visual on these two. One about the other. But at the end of the day, obviously this whole area is purely made for getting some of the voltage and some of the warning lights switched in or out of it too. So if I just trace this through, this little thin wire right below me is, I'm quite sure that's just the ECU warning light, because obviously the carby doesn't have that on the dashboard, so they've, in this case, it's broken off, but they've in this case just run a separate warning light, so you've at least got something to know if the ECU is running. Yeah, it has an error and it doesn't like you very much. I won't go into completely detailed wiring on this yet, because obviously my main goal is just to give you guys an overview of what wiring has come out of the 2.2 harness. But at the end of the day, they've got a fuse box here. It has 6 fuses, only 5 are in use. But what I'll call the input side of the fuse box, or what has to get wired into the L series, it comes down to these 4 wires. So aside from the other 2 that I ID'd earlier, there's purely just 4 wires here. Now at the moment, the two thin ones are warning lights. They literally were the only 2 wires that went to the dashboard side of the harness, so I had to cut them because I couldn't get the dashboard out without those 2. Everything else was wired into the shall we call it, the firewall side of the harness. So I'll actually try and ID these wires on the firewall side of the plug socket, so literally this whole loom then can stay in the car when you pull the dashboard out, should you have to pull the dashboard out. One of these, I believe, is the oil warning light, and the other one is possibly temp sensor. They're my 2 highest, yeah, they're my 2 highest suspicions for what they're for, which I'll cement in later. And as far as these 2 wires go, one's definitely a B+, as in a main voltage wire, and the other one, I think from memory, is a key on switched voltage wire, but I'll confirm those in the next video. But just wanted to give you guys a quick overview of the harness. So although it was quite awkward to get out because it was tucked in very neat and tidy, at the end of the day, if you discard the stuff that plugs straight back into the Liberty engine, and tuck all these few relays up out of the way and the ECU, there's not that much that really needs to be adapted into the L series harness. There are a few other queries as per what I was saying earlier regarding what they've done under the bonnet with the main fuses, but that's really a separate video to this. This is really just to show you the harness and the IDing of the wires. What's not in this harness is the alternator warning light. They've done something different in the engine bay and plumbed the Liberty alternator warning light wire into the L series wiring, so therefore it comes through by itself separate for this harness. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully I'll be able to start putting this harness into the red one. We'll go from there. Any questions, drop a little note below. But hopefully, next step coming up soon.